Bill March joined the Air Force in 1977, graduating from the Royal Military College in 1982. He underwent basic navigation training in Winnipeg and served with the 407th Maritime Patrol and the 404th Maritime Patrol in training squadrons. Posted to Royal Roads Military College in 1990 as a squadron commander, he was promoted the next year and assumed military training and administrative duties for the college. In 1993, he completed his master's degree at the University of Victoria and was selected to recreate the position of Air Force historian at 1st Canadian Air Division Headquarters. After Staff College in 1998, he filled a series of staff appointments at National Defense Headquarters. He is married to Joanna and extremely proud of his two daughters, Erica and Brittany. I'm proud to have with us here today, Major Bill March.
So we're going to talk a little bit about the Canadian aviation in the First World War. I know Greg said the Royal Canadian Air Force in the First World War, God bless them, but we didn't exist in the First World War. So we're going to talk a little bit about humble beginnings, the Canadian Aviation Corps, the Royal Flying Corps, the Royal Canadian Naval Air Service. We're going to talk about Royal Flying Corps Canada and the American connection, Canadian Air Services, and a little bit that I like to throw in called so what? You know, I do a lot of teaching going out, and by far my most taxing audience are 5 to 7 years old. Because if you're boring, they have no mercy on you. So I always throw in a so what? Why did I make you spend an hour of your life? And frankly, we're all conscious of how many heartbeats we have left, so an hour is a lot. Why did I make you sit here for an hour? So when I'm talking to the kids and I want to explain exactly what it was like as a World War I flyer, these two pictures probably indicate exactly what it was like. So think of it as sticking your head out of a fast-moving car and looking like that, and the other thing is think of all the things you got to put up with hitting you in the face. Okay, so that sort of gives you an idea of what a flight was like for a World War I flyer. Now let's throw in some inconsequential things like other people trying to kill you, airplanes that may or may not work, and you sort of get the idea of what life was like. But most people don't know what Canada was like in 1914. So take a look at that. Now, the interesting thing about this is probably the final point, and it has confused Americans and a lot of Canadians for a gazillion years. We were a self-governing dominion. Exactly what the hell does that mean? It meant that when England declared war in August 1914, Canada was automatically at war. We had no choice. We didn't control our own foreign policy. That was controlled by London, as we were part of the empire. Which makes me wonder why we didn't do God Save the Queen too as well. That would have been another national anthem we could have thrown in there. Now, for a historian, what makes this so interesting is that Canadian citizenship doesn't exist in 1914. There are no Canadians. They were just citizens of the empire. Sort of makes you long for Star Wars. We're citizens of the empire. Which means that as a historian, when I go back, I have a great difficulty saying, this guy's a Canadian, this guy's a Brit, this guy's a Canadian, this guy's an American, because our borders were pretty porous in those days too. So a lot of times I have arguments with people who are saying, well, how come you didn't include Jones? Because Jones was Canadian. Well, Jones was born in England, educated in England, immigrated to Canada in 1913, and then went over. Is he Canadian? So we have a problem. Fortunately, we solved that in 1947. Now, our humble beginnings Aviation Canada all started with a chap there, Alexander Graham Bell, and the Aerial Experimental Association. Back in 1909, they flew the Silver Dart, and this was the first heavy-than-air flight in the Empire, and the first heavy-than-air flight in Canada. And I've got to stand this side. So that was our first real flight, our first real steps into the air. Now, what in Canada is almost a pastime. If you have a new product and you want to make money off it, what do? You try and sell it to the federal government, right? So that's what his associates, McCurney and Baldwin, did, is they tried to sell it to the government. In August '09, they took a couple of their experimental aircraft to beautiful sand dunes of Petawawa, Ontario. A lot of people have been to Petawawa, Ontario. Okay. And basically, they had a crack at trying to sell it to the Minister of Finance and the Minister of Militia Defense. And you can see they were less than successful. And that's what one of the observers, Lieutenant Colonel Sam Hughes, said about it. Can everybody read that? Now, fast forward 5 years, 1914, Lieutenant Colonel Sir Sam Hughes is now the Minister of National Defense, and lo and behold, he goes off and he forms the Canadian Aviation Corps. He hires a Captain Janney. Captain Janney has a long history as a con man, so he's a perfect start for the Canadian Air Force. He hires Janney, gives him 5,000 taxpayers' dollars, and says, "You go on down to New York State and you buy yourselves an aircraft." Sir, off he goes and he buys the Burgess Dunn, that magnificent machine there on your left, correction, your right, my left. So he flies it back to Canada, recruits 2 more individuals, a sergeant and another officer, Lieutenant Sharp, and they go over to England, and fundamentally the aircraft sits and rots away in the plains of Salisbury and never flies. And that's the start of Her Majesty's Canadian Air Service. However, there were rumors, and there will be time and time again throughout the course of the First World War, where they try to create a Canadian service. But fundamentally, it never gets off the ground, no pun intended. However, for our perspective, or from my perspective as a historian, it does give us something. It gives us our first Canadian air fatality. When Lieutenant Sharp, who discussed it with Captain Janney, who by this time has been sent home in disgrace, basically joins the British Royal Flying Corps and is killed in a training accident. He becomes our first military casualty. Really something you really want to be remembered for. I died first. Now, in Canada, because our primary effort was going to be sending over the Canadian Expeditionary Force, so we weren't that interested in aviation at that point in time. But the Royal Flying Corps and the Royal Naval Air Service was really interested in Canada because they saw Canada as a pool of potential recruits. So they said, okay, if you're willing to pay your own way, get your own training, and do all this stuff, we will accept you with open arms. And so basically these guys were fighting for the same pool of people. And then just to make it more fun, the Army was fighting for the same pool of people. So you have all 3 of the institutions trying to get the same one. But as long as you were willing to go to places like the Curtis Flying School in Toronto, pay your own education, and obviously work very, very hard, they would accept you into the Royal Flying Corps and the Royal Canadian Air Service. But this was a trickle of people. So where did the Royal Flying Corps and the Royal Naval Air Service get the vast majority of Canadians during this time period? Well, where we always go to, the Air Force always goes to when it's looking for good material. Right? We go to the poor bloody infantry. Most of the Canadians who would serve in the British Flying Corps up until about 1917 came from the Canadian Expeditionary Forces. Now, why they would want to leave that glamorous life to become an aviator, I have no idea. But we'll take a look at some of the more well-known aviators, and they'll give you sort of an idea of how their careers went. For instance, this is Billy Bishop, perhaps the best well-known of all the aces from the First World War, or at least Canadian aces from the First World War. And in his biography, he sums it up quite literally. Why did I want to become an aviator? It was the mud. Right? I swear it was because he got to wear that fashionable uniform, but it was the mud. He was a cavalry officer. Came very, very close to being expelled from my alma mater, the Royal Military College, for cheating. So of course we had to make him an officer. He went over, spent some time in the mud of Salisbury Plain, and became first an observer, which was a navigator of the day, an observer, and then he went on to become a pilot. Now, Billy Bishop would go on to claim 72 victories. There's a lot of controversy about Lieutenant Colonel Bishop by the end of the war. He wins Her Majesty's Victoria Cross, the highest award for gallantry we can give. But he is one of only 2 individuals who were awarded the Victoria Cross in its history based on their word. He said he went out and he flew that action and he achieved all these extra kills and things, and they awarded the Victoria Cross. I'm not going to get into that debate even after this, because some people say yes, some people say no. There's a well-known book out there called Brave flyer, bold liar, right? There's lots of controversy around him. Let's just say that regardless of whether or not you believe everything you're told about Billy Bishop, the very fact that he fought and survived all those months on the front make him a hero in my book. The other well-known Canadian fighter pilot, Billy Barker. By Jove, I was a foolish boy. William Barker actually joined as a private soldier, was commissioned, went on to be an observer and then a pilot. Billy Barker won his Victoria Cross for single-handedly taking on numbers vary, 15, 60, a lot of German fighters. He was wounded 4 times, shot down 4 of them, and lived to tell the tale. The comment at the bottom is indicative of how the fighting was. Most of the fighting would take place over the front lines, where the soldiers on both sides could watch. And this comment was written by Lieutenant General Major McNaughton of the day. He will eventually become the Chief of the General Staff in Canada, and is indicative of the witnesses that were there for Billy Barker's Victoria Cross. Now, both Barker and Bishop were described as indifferent flyers. You could argue how many planes they wrecked as to how many times they were shot down. They were not the best fighters or flyers in the world, but they were the finest shots. All of them had records, and all of them were acclaimed for their ability to shoot targets at long distances with a rifle. And both of them enjoyed the tactic of sneaking up on their enemies, getting as close as they could, killing the pilot, and then getting out of there. Okay? Nothing chivalrous about it. However, these guys, during the war, are the rock stars of their day. And they are the rock stars because they do things that are larger than life. Not only are they played up by the press, they do things like this. This is a copy of a leaflet that Barker would drop on his enemy's aerodromes and say, hey, I'm going to be here this date, why don't you come up and fight me? Hey, come on, up and fight me. Not that I'm saying that fighter pilots need a large ego, however, the other thing we like to remember Billy Barker about, that's completely different from Billy Bishop, is Billy Bishop was a lone wolf. Billy Bishop liked to go out on his own, do what he had to do and come back. Billy Bishop was a good fighter pilot, in my opinion, a so-so leader. Billy Barker was a good fighter pilot, a good leader. He never lost a wingman while he was in command, because he believed in training and bringing the new people up, which was something that was not always done in all the squadrons. And I had to throw in a naval pilot. Any naval pilots here? Any naval people here? That's why I threw it in there. Okay, we have a naval pilot. Royal Canadian Naval Reserve. Raymond Collishaw. Raymond Collishaw actually worked for Fisheries and Oceans. So he was a civil servant, basically. Served on the ships for Canada's fisheries protection, and then basically joined the Royal Naval Air Service during the war. He went over there, survived the war, went on to become an air vice marshal, and due to the Italians in the desert, what he did to the Germans in France, he basically knocked them out of the sky. Now he's famous for creating this thing. It's called the Black Flight, Sopwith triplanes. And the Germans didn't like these guys, because these guys were very, very good at their job. But because they were the rock stars of the day, and much like Richthofen and Richthoven's Flying Circus, they advertised their abilities and their qualities and things to whatever extent they were allowed to under the rules of the day. In this case, they painted all of their aircraft black, and yes, I know they look like green, but they're black. Okay, gave them all names, and they would fly and they would attack the Germans based on this. And they developed a reputation that would precede them. Here's our top 10. These are the top 10 Canadian fighter pilots in the First World War. Now, Billy Bishop was, for the longest time, credited as the top Commonwealth fighter pilot. Now there's another controversy out there. They're saying a British pilot actually had more confirmed kills than that. But if you take a look at these, it's very difficult to determine exactly what is in modern terms, or World War II terms, what would be destroyed, what would be declared probable, and what would be declared damaged. Some of these are obviously shot down, some of these are forced down out of control, some of these are, disappeared in the clouds and they're flaming. Okay? So it's very, very difficult to decide or determine the exact truth in here. But these are the claims, and these are the ones that they're credited to. So pretty good. Now, the other thing you have to know about the Victoria Cross and Billy Bishop and Billy Barker is that you had to be alive to get it. You couldn't be dead. In the First World War, if you were dead, you didn't qualify. You had to be alive to get the Victoria Cross. Whereas in the Second World War, odds are you were dead and you got it. It's weird things. But in the First World War, you had to be alive. Now, we talk a lot about fighter pilots, we make a big deal about fighter pilots and things, but that is the most dangerous weapon in the First World Era War, the camera. Because the thing that's going to win the battles and kill the most people on the ground is artillery. And artillery is revolutionized with aerial photography and aerial mapping. That becomes the most dangerous thing. And so when you talk about the scout pilots and all these things, their fundamental job is to shoot down German airplanes before the German airplanes can shoot down our core pilots and our air crews that are doing the mapping and the observing and stuff. And the Germans are doing the same thing. They're trying to shoot down our people before we can shoot down their core pilots. So that's the most dangerous air weapon in the First World War. Two of the more spectacular battles in the First World War are the Somme and Arras. Part of Arras is Vimy Ridge, which is celebrated in Canada as a sort of a national coming of age, if you will, in 1917. Both of them are bloodbaths. In the Somme, they say that within the first couple of hours of the battle, the British suffered 20,000 casualties. We cannot imagine that kind of a death toll these days. And there's a certain tongue-in-cheek irony to that comment at the bottom, said by Rowan Atkinson, an actor who stars in as Edmund Blackadder in a whole series of comedies. Now, that's on the ground. We're talking literally tens and hundreds of thousands of casualties on the ground. That slaughter is matched in the air. During the Somme campaign, the RFC, the Royal Flying Corps and the Royal Naval Air Service, lose that many aircraft and pilots. In April, 1 month, April, we call it Bloody April, for good reason, that's how many aircraft and pilots it lose. And that's not counting wounded, and that's not counting captured. That's the casualty rate. At the same time, the Royal Flying Corps and the Royal Naval Air Service are expanding. They've recognized how important aircraft are to the battle, and they want more and more and more of them. So they have a problem. Where are they going to get all these people? And that's when we establish something called the Royal Flying Corps Canada, which is basically fundamentally a training organization that they established here in Canada. 1917, they send over a lieutenant colonel by the name of Cuthbert Orr. I don't make these names up. Cuthbert Orr is his name. He comes over here and he says, great, we're going to create an entire air organization in Canada. Canada, how much money are you going to give us? How much money do you think Canada gives you? Oh, you got it. Okay. Yeah, we give them nothing. It's all funded by the Crown. It's all funded by England. But what we do is we give them land. We have lots of land we can give them. So we give them this giant chunk of Borden. In fact, there are trees there. Too bad, there are trees there. And then, what is the other thing the federal government likes to do when it needs land? We take it from the native Canadians. So we also establish some airfields on native land. So these are going to be the main training bases. It's going to be Borden, going to be Toronto, Hamilton, and Deseronto. Within 2 months, sight unseen, because we established this in December 1916, January 1917, snow everywhere. So Cuthbert comes up and says, okay, see all these trees in that part? We're going to cut them all down, we're going to turn this into an airfield. And that's what he does at Borden. So within literally 9.5 weeks, they're flying their first aircraft. That's how much work these guys go into. We're going to use this particular aircraft. We're going to mass produce this sucker. We're going to buy a whole bunch from the Americans. We call that the Jenny. and we're going to produce them under license in Toronto, and we're going to call that one the Canuck. So this becomes really the first mass-produced aircraft that we do in Canada, and we build roughly about 1,400 new fighters. And they're going to be our primary training aircraft, and they're going to do everything that we ask of them. Now, I'm in uniform, so I spend a lot of my time bad-mouthing both government, bureaucrats, and business people. Because obviously, the government makes the wrong decision, bureaucrats won't let me do my job, and the business people keep selling me crap. Okay? Well, every once in a while, you got to swallow your words. In this case, the chap on the left is a guy by the name of Joseph Flavel, businessman who basically in 1916 is appointed by the British government to look over something called the Imperial Munitions Board. The Imperial Munitions Board is the blanket organization that controls all of the military contracts in Canada during the First World War. And he is the one virtually single-handedly that creates an aircraft industry and makes sure that the Royal Flying Corps has everything it needs to get the job done in Canada. And it's a fantastic organization. And if there's ever an individual who deserves a biography in my country, it's this chap. Okay? Nobody knows about him, but without him, a whole part of our aviation history during and after the war wouldn't have existed. Eventually, we go all the way up to 3 wings or 16 squadrons. And they will be scattered throughout Canada. And they will do everything from basic training to advanced training to gunnery to photographic work and stuff like this. But of course, what's the first thing you do when you join any military branch? What's the first thing you learn? How to march. That's right. So in Toronto, we have a big school we established at the University of Toronto, and that's really where we're bringing all the young people in, and we do same things. We give them haircuts, we give them bad-fitting uniforms, and we teach them how to do drill. And then we make flyers of it, because close order drill is the first thing you need when you're going to be a fighter pilot or a bomber pilot. And they fly, and God, they fly. And the idea of the day is, this is called stunting, by the way. We would call that an FAA violation waiting to happen, but they call it stunting. And the idea being is that they encourage these guys to push their training, push their aircraft, push their skills to the limit, because that's what's going to keep them alive in combat. So they encourage them to do this. And because they're encouraged to do this, you get a lot of this. It is true in both world wars that we suffer an inordinate amount of casualties training. Why? In this case, not only because the aircraft are rudimentary from our perspective, but also because we get them to push it, but also because we expect it, and we are prepared to accept wastage. And that was the term of the day. This is wastage. So I can understand how you can hit a building. I can even faintly understand how you can hit a cow. It takes skill to hit a train. Right? You have to time it perfectly to get the locomotive. That man is probably a general in my Air Force, I swear. And in Canada, the other thing you got to put up with, this is snow. This is Armour Heights. Any Canadians ever go to staff college? Armour Heights, lovely place. I give you an idea of exactly how much snow we had there at the time. And I pity people who live in Palm Springs. I really, really, really do. Because you've never had those Canadian experiences of enjoying exhaust fog, or going to work on square tires because your tires are frozen in whatever place they were. Or my favorite, vodka jello. Ever make vodka jello? You take vodka, you mix it with jello powder, you put it in an ice cube tray, you put it outside, and the next day you can do vodka shooters. Like that. Really good. But these guys had to work at this stuff. Lots of fun. And this is what the well-known Canadian aviator of the day used to wear. But it also got us invented. And one of the things these guys in the Royal Flying Corps Canada pioneered was the use of skis on aircraft. But that took us a little while. These poor buggers are the ones we left behind in the winter of 1917, 1918. Because all the real lucky ones Guess where they went? No.
Germany.
We sent them to Texas.
Oh, man.
Right? Because by this time, the Americans have entered the war. And they go in big guns, like they always do, but they have a lack of instructors and they have a lack of schools and stuff. So they cut a deal with the Royal Flying Corps saying, hey, if you help us train, say, 10 squadrons, we will provide you with facilities down around Austin, Texas, and those lovely places there, where you can come down and train during the winter months. And we thought this was a good idea. So we virtually moved the entire training operation south by train. Right? So we have a big connection in that we helped to establish, let me rephrase that, we helped to build the U.S. Air Service. Right? See, two spiffy uniforms on the left-hand side, right? Shared training, and by God, we've got some good posters as well, too. And so what we did is we went down there and we trained for the summer months, for the winter months. And everything that we did in Canada, we learned we could do with the United States. So we crashed airplanes, we did good training. And strangely enough, we have one of the few larger Commonwealth War Grave cemeteries down outside of Austin, Texas. You can go visit the boys down there. Eventually, we would do what we said we would do. The Royal Flying Corps coughed up 10 experienced officers Americans who had served in the Royal Flying Corps. They became the initial batch of squadron commanders, and we would train these 10 squadrons. And these 10 squadrons would go in England and fight with the British, whereas a big chunk of the U.S. Air Service actually went over to France and fought with the French. Now, what I haven't seen, and if there's any amateur historians out there, I would really love to see a comparison of who had the better experience. The 10 squadrons fighting with the Brits, or the squadrons fighting with the French. It's a toss-up. I'm just curious. Look at that. You know he's born to be a fighter pilot, right? Royal Flying Corps Canada, by the time it gets going, is churning out hundreds of pilots, and these guys are all going overseas. And these individuals are going to be what drives the large number of Canadians that are in the Royal Flying Corps and the Royal Naval Air Service by the end of the war. One of them was my favorite, Alan McLeod. Eventually he went to Victoria Cross, although you probably couldn't tell he was going to win the Victoria Cross here. He's from the grand metropolis of Stonewall, Manitoba. If you blink, you miss Stonewall. Okay? So basically in March, he tries to join the Royal Flying Corps, but you see from the letter there, he's too young. Well, he's too young by a month. He turns 18 in April and they accept him, right? Now, this is your typical farm boy, 18-year-old, just away from the family for the first time. So, we have a unique look at his life because he wrote home incessantly. And a lot of his letters are filled with, I want to come home, I don't know what to do, no one likes me. It sounds very much like my kids. It really does, right? Except that he's off in Toronto, and basically he's training to be a pilot. So he finishes his training and they send him over in the fall of 1918. Actually, fall of 1917. And then once he gets over to Europe, he does what kids, and I'm sure those of you who've had family members serve, is basically they tell you, everything's fine, Mom. Don't worry about me, I'm far away from the war, no one's going to hurt me. Oh, I like your long johns, nice cookies you send me, all that sort of stuff. So he's your typical teenager. Until this particular day in March of 1918. And I need 2 gallant volunteers. See, when I teach about the military and stuff like this to kids, I tell them the very first thing, okay? You see, if you ever hear the word volunteer, you never look at the person who said the word volunteer. What you do is you look everywhere else. Anywhere else, right? You two gentlemen didn't look anywhere else. And we'll turn you around. You're my training aides. You are high-paid Canadian training aides, right? So, I'm looking at your hair. You look exactly like Alan McLeod. You can be Alan McLeod, and you can be Second Lieutenant Hammond, okay? You're a Second Lieutenant, so you will call me sir. So on this particular day in March of 1918, Alan and Second Lieutenant Hammond are flying the Armstrong Whitworth FK-8. That's the aircraft up there on your left. It's affectionately known as the Big Ack, right? It's a very, very stable, very, very good observation platform. It's also used as a light bomber. On this particular day, they've been launched because the Germans have just launched their last massive offensive of the First World War, and anything that can fly is in the air to try and stem the Germans. On this particular day, they're sent to bomb a German airfield. Can't find it. Hammond sucks as a navigator. Okay, so they can't find the German aerodrome, so they're on the way back home. When Allen spots a German aircraft, and Allen being Allen, turns around, attacks the German aircraft so that Hammond can shoot it down. In the process, they are jumped by 7 German fighter airplanes from von Richthofen's flying circus. Now, I'm a born coward. If I'm attacked by 7 of anything, I run away. Not Allen. Allen turns around and engages the aircraft. And in the process, each of them are wounded 3 times. But they managed to shoot down a 2nd German aircraft. By this time, their aircraft is riddled with bullets, and one of the bullets has pierced the gas tank, having gas flow down to the bottom of the airplane and catch fire. As you see in the painting, Allen climbs up to the left wing of his airplane, leans into the cockpit so he can continue to maneuver his aircraft. Second Lieutenant Hammond straddles the back of the aircraft like he would a horse so he can continue to fire his machine gun at the Germans. They're each wounded 2 more times. They've each been wounded 5 times now. Now, Allen, pretty bite for a pilot now, okay? He's been wounded 5 times, his airplane's burning, he figures it's time to get out of there. He dives towards no man's land. And no man's land is that little piece of dirt between the good guys and the bad guys, being pursued by a 3rd German fighter, which Hammond shoots down. So they shot down 3 German fighters. They crash in no man's land. Allen, again pretty smart for a pilot, is standing in the wing, so he's thrown clear of the wreckage. Hammond, not bright for a navigator, is sitting on the airplane, so he's trapped inside the wreckage. Allen gets up, staggers back, grabs his gunner, and starts to drag him towards safety. The aircraft blows up, wounding Allen for a 6th time. But they keep going. By this time, the German gunners on the ground have spotted our 2 intrepid airmen and opened fire, wounding Allen for a 7th time. And he finally makes it to safety, and they're spirited away. Thank you, guys. Yeah, guys, go. Hammond is also decorated for valor, loses his leg and immigrates to Canada in the 1920s and lives a long, prosperous life as a farmer on the prairies. Allen takes a long, long time to recover. Very long time. So much so, his dad is a doctor back in Stonewall. His dad comes over to help him nurse him back to health. So it gives you an idea. And as soon as he finds out he's going to be awarded the Victoria Cross, he becomes a rock star of the day. And his friends and the public recognize his feats. Now, while you're reading that, think of the picture of the chubby-faced guy who was in training in Canada, and this picture, which is what he looked like when he got his Victoria Cross. He comes back to Canada, catches the flu and dies 4 days before the end of the war. He was one of numerous victims of the Spanish influenza, and the Spanish influenza actually kills more people after the war than were killed during the war. And his funeral becomes one of the noteworthy news items at the end of a long, long war. He's my favorite Victoria Cross. Why? Well, he's 19 years old when he dies. He was just 18 when he won it. But he's also a corps pilot. He's not a fighter pilot. He's the guy that does the dull, dirty, dangerous crap, who almost always never get recognized. But of all the Victoria Crosses that were awarded during the Second War, a handful are awarded to these these guys. And these guys do most of the heavy lifting and most of the dying. All right, so by this time, even Her Majesty's Canadian government says, ooh, look, all this press, all these potential votes, maybe we should create our own Canadian Air Service. And of course, we do this after the British have amalgamated everything and created the Royal Air Force in April 1918. So we said, okay, first thing we're going to do is we're going to create the Royal Canadian Naval Air Service. So we did. Lasted from December to December 1918. Never had an airplane, never flew an hour, but it existed. Okay? And then we created the Canadian Air Force. Basically, 18 to 21. What we did is we said to the Brits, hey, since we don't have any Canadian ground crew we can do, how about if you give us 2 squadrons, we'll pay for it, and we'll send Canadians to it, and they'll be the Canadian Air Force. So they gave us a fighter squadron and a bomber squadron. It was formed in November, never saw any combat, and basically the fundamental task of the Canadian Air Force until it was disbanded in 21 was to create and repackage all the aircraft, the surplus aircraft that the Brits were giving us. Okay? But it did exist, and I know it existed because I have pictures. But we don't celebrate that in our Air Force. That's not the birthday of my Air Force. My birthday, or my Air Force's birthday, doesn't happen until 1924. Don't ask me why, because I'm not sure. But we don't celebrate that. So the war's over. What happens is that's how many Canadians we have who served in the services. Okay? By 1918, because of the Royal Flying Corps Canada, we're literally a quarter of the aircrew strength of the Brits, of the Imperial Services. Okay? And those are the casualties we have. So what? War is over, all the bombs go away, our governments disband the militaries, the Air Force goes downhill, we virtually sell every airfield we have except for Borden. You can buy a Jenny for a couple $100. So what does that mean? What does that mean for Canada? Our experience and the treasure, the blood and treasure we spent in World War I. Well, this is what it means for us in the interwar period. These are probably the biggest things that came out of the war for us. You don't see any bullets or bombs or things or any of that stuff there. What you see is you see cameras, because that's going to be a biggie as we map Canada during the interwar period. And we prove to the civil government that we can actually be useful. Okay, flying boats, big time. Got no airfields in Canada. Flying boats are big. Why do we have that young guy in uniform? Because we have a core of highly trained pilots and ground crew that we can actually use to keep aviation, both civil and military, alive in the interwar period. And why the skis? Because in Canada, if you can't fly in the winter, you're buggered. And the skis become very, very important. So that's the so what when it comes to us. But there's one more thing that's even more important. Okay? Now, everybody says, ooh, okay, this is the 1919 poster for the National Exhibition. And what's really important about this poster is that. Because what you have now and what you've created in Canada is you've created a certain amount of air-mindedness. The genie is out of the bottle. People know about airplanes. They've read about these guys. They're the rock stars and everything and stuff like this. They know about airplanes. And there's no way the government is going to be able to put the genie back in the bottle. So now they have to worry about rules and regulations and licensing and all this stuff. And it starts to snowball. So if there's one thing that came out of the war, it's the fact that Canada was dragged kicking and screaming into the aviation age. And that's it. Any questions?